Okay guys, today I'm going to have a little conversation with Ed Smith. We're going to talk about how you design or build an engine based on application for racing. So what we're going to do is at least we're going to start with circle track racing or longer distance racing versus drag racing and just talk about some of the differences and what he thinks about when he's building an engine. So stay tuned, here we go. We're going to have fun with this one. Okay Ed, we've been having a little conversation about different kinds of racing, and what are the basic categories of racing engines you've been building over the years?
I mean, like for drag racing and circle track and maybe some boat racing and things like this are different, all different categories.
Right.
And then different applications.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want to do with them. And then a type of racing like circle track racing is totally different. And again, a lot of my friends in the drag racing family never knew I did a lot of circle track racing my whole life.
Yeah.
And then the circle track people didn't know I was doing any drag racing.
Well, a lot of times that doesn't cross over for a lot of people, does it?
It doesn't, because usually one family, sometimes the people will change from drag racing into circle track racing.
Okay.
But that's from doing a real clean car, perfect. And our drag racing cars were always polished and cleaned and waxed up, and then we always, the clothes we wore Friday and Saturday, and we had to put our good clothes on and shine up a little bit and put a new hat on for whoever was sponsoring us for Sunday morning races. And that's when the public came around Sunday and took pictures and asked you questions. And then, of course, if you happen to win a race, lucky enough to do that, I guess. But, then everybody took your pictures and they publicized those pictures. Sure. So you had to look good for the sponsors, and we always did that, and everybody else. And the dirt track, the more you race and everything, the dirtier you get. And pretty soon at the end of the race, looks like a bunch of whatever, not so classy mechanics and stuff. And you've been under the car in the middle of the race and changing tires, and of course there's mud and oil, and
you're not going to be shiny clean after that.
You're not very shiny and clean, and you took the car home. Sometimes it wasn't so good shape either.
Right.
Maybe you had a couple fenders left, and the whole body's pasted in, and it wasn't uncommon that between one Saturday night and another Saturday night, you had to replace half the body on the car. At least that took you days and days to pound all the dents out of it and stuff, and clean it up so you could actually have something presentable for next Friday and Saturday night. Yeah,
right.
It was kind of different.
When you're building an engine for the purpose of drag racing, what are the kinds of things, like how is that engine going to be used, and what do you have to think about when you're building an engine like that?
The first thing you're setting up with picking a class or something, and the class is usually how heavy the car is. Okay. And how big the car is. If it's a big car, that's competitive too. You can learn a lot of races with a big car. You don't have to have a little car. And the littler car, of course, is not so stable. It's kind of slides around a little bit, but anyways, a little car, then you'd have maybe a lighter motor. Okay. And it would make it go fast. If you can get a lot of horsepower out of a light motor and run real fast, that's the name of the game. Sure. You don't have to work the motor near as hard. Mm-hmm. If you got a heavier car, then you got to put a bigger motor in it, and you have to work a little harder to get more horsepower out of it. Every little ounce of horsepower sometimes to get it to run that class, and usually in drag racing too, is there's a class in that, and everybody runs off a national record. So the national record may be set somewhere in Denver and maybe somewhere in California with a good humidity. And he has that particular car or that combination of weight per cubic inches. That's drag racing. Usually all those classes are weight, so you end up with a whole variety of cars. You don't find a whole bunch of Chevelles or a whole bunch of Camaros in one class. You could actually find a Hudson in there someplace in the old days, or a Ford or any kind of a weird car, as long as they had a motor in it with the cubic inches, and they used to do it with horsepower sometimes. But then that got out of hand because in those days with the horsepower ratings, it was factory horsepower. And they were real sticky on eliminations and qualifications and specifications. So I knew one of the guys here in town I knew quite well. It had a a car, and he wins some races, and they end up a week or so later, they find him with two stronger valve springs in it.
Oh.
And usually that's too picky, and so you end up with, you can put stronger valve springs in it and make it go a few more RPMs, and you got more horsepower, and well, that's part of winning a race.
Okay, so can you just, I mean, that's a good example of changing, how you build the engine can change a lot about it, even one thing. So
for sure.
So for example, valve springs,
yes.
What are the pros and cons of different valve springs?
Well, the valve springs are stiffer, and then you can only get certain valve springs between the valve and the cylinder head. Okay. That's where they compressed, and that's how you assembled them.
Right.
And if you didn't, whatever you can do, and you can buy different valve springs, different weights and stuff like this, and that's just part of technicality of building a motor. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get them too strong.
Yeah, what happens if they're too strong?
They'll wear out faster.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if you get them too tight, then they'll bind up. The coils will all bind together, and they won't.
I guess they don't release properly.
They won't release right, and you can't compress the valve.
Right.
If the springs are all mashed together.
I see.
It's like a whole bunch of springs mashed together, and they won't do that. So you can't do that.
Uh-huh.
And then you can always put longer valves in them.
Okay.
You know, and you can buy those, and so that goes back to specifications sometimes. And in the early days of drag racing, the valves had to be all original. You couldn't do it anyway. You couldn't make them. Couldn't buy longer ones, maybe even 100 thousandths longer.
Okay.
And you could put a 100 thousandths longer valve in it, and then maybe a 100 thousandths shorter push rod, and it all equaled the same. And I remember years ago we used to have our probably in the 60s we had some Chevrolets that we raced, and they were hydraulic lifters, but they didn't tell us we couldn't modify the lifter.
So what would you do to the lifters?
So we take the lifter apart and put a little washer in the bottom.
Okay.
Steel washer, so it wouldn't collapse. A hydraulic lifter is a plunger inside, runs in hydraulic oil, and so it just floats in there a certain amount, a few thousandths. But and then at that time when our stock car, Chevrolet motor, would go to a certain RPMs, like 6,000, and just stop. It didn't do anything, but it just wouldn't go any more RPMs.
Okay.
So we take the valve springs apart, but we got done with, they were still hydraulics. We took them apart, they were hydraulics. And just a small amount of hydraulics, and not as much as a quarter of an inch sometimes.
Really?
They almost had a quarter of an inch of hydraulic in them. So then we put the washers in them, and be careful to adjust them so it run fine, and nobody could tell the difference. And then they'd go about 500 or 600 RPMs more in each gear.
Really? Just by sneaking that little washer in there would give you that extra?
Washer. And I can't say that we took advantage of the classes and took advantage of what we could come up with, the engineering, and I guess it was called engineering in those days, or messing around, and it worked.
Yeah.
I think more than that, than today they would call it engineering and things, but that's what we did, some of the things.
Right on. So going back to a drag racing engine, what do you, like, let's say you're in a given class of drag racing and you're going to build an engine within that class. What are you thinking about to choose that engine as far as flywheels or?
Well, the class would be, it was a stick shift or automatic.
Okay.
And so that's two different classes.
Okay.
And then in the stick shift, you might, depends on if the car's heavy or not, or a light car.
Okay.
Then some of the professionals and stuff, and I knew quite a few of them, that they would put a big heavy flywheel in it. Most flywheels are about 50 pounds, 52 pounds or something. You could buy a light flywheel that was maybe 15 pounds.
Oh, wow.
But then if you let the clutch out, it would almost stop the engine with a light flywheel. And a heavy one that had a 50 pound or 60 pound flywheel, you buy a steel flywheel that was maybe 60 or 70 pounds. And if you spun that up to 8,000 RPMs or 7,000, let's say 7,000, and it let out in the clutch, and every time you shifted it stayed at 7,000. Like a big flywheel, it would just keep going.
So it's really hard to bog that engine down.
Yeah, you couldn't bog it down, and every time you shifted it, then it would either leap forward like a frog, and you step beside it. Every time you shifted it, you'd gain 3 or 4 feet on the guy, and and there's nothing he could do about it.
Wow.
So that was on a...
Now, why would someone choose a light flywheel on a car sometimes?
A light flywheel, the engine would rev up faster.
Okay.
So that would be a car that maybe would have a 4-speed in it over a 3-speed, or else a 4-speed with a different gear ratio in the back, where you would go down to almost maybe lower down to 2,000 RPMs and go back up to 8,000 fast, real quick.
Okay.
Almost instantly, it would wind up if you stepped on the gas. So then maybe that would be really good in a 5-speed or 6-speed today.
Okay.
Yeah, you just keep the RPMs.
So you're going through the gears a lot and you're moving the RPM a lot, I guess.
Yeah, moving a lot of RPMs fast, yeah.
I see. Okay,
And
cool.
then there's all kinds of clutches in there. A clutch that worked with the stick shift and also the torque converters now. And when we first got started with torque converters, we had a race car and we wanted to get, if you got a higher stall speed torque converter, you could set it to starting line and hold your foot on the brake. And then, of course, some of them we had front brakes only type thing, but electronically. So we could hold the front brake with an electric switch in our hand, and then and rev the engine up, and it wouldn't move until you let go of that electric switch, and that would be
that would be a way to launch, I guess?
Launch engines, yeah.
Okay.
And then we tried to get torque converters. We get the smaller torque converters. I remember the first ones we got, I think we bought an Buick Opel converter. That was out of a Buick car. Yep. And they made a little Opel 4-cylinder car.
Yeah, that was a little German car, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. But anyways, we got that converter and we got that to change over and put it in some of our V8s.
Oh.
And then like some of the V8 cars, a Turbo 400 usually has a 12-inch torque converter. And then the 350 has an 11-inch, which give you a little bit of small. So you could put a 350 converter on a Turbo 400 and gain some RPMs on a big block Chevy.
Okay.
Then you put the Opel converter in, gain some more. So you can actually start the starting line and rev the engine up to 3,000 or 4,000 before the car started to move.
Wow.
And so that would be a good way to launch it. And now they have converters that you can hold till 5,000 RPMs and still be in gear. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do things. So right now the new technology in torque transmissions and torque converters it's amazing. Mm-hmm. Some of these guys think of and they work on them until they work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, staying on the drag engines, what do you pick as far as a cam for a drag engine?
Well, camshaft, you'd want something that would go up in RPMs and maximum lift and duration, so the engine breathes more air in, more air out. That's the whole thing of horsepower. Yeah. And even so, the camshaft, if a turbocharged car. Some of the new cars are turbocharged now. Some of the people know all about that. Yeah. Not so much about just straight carburation, but turbocharged car, it don't have any horsepower until you rev the engine up. Right. So now you have to put almost a stock cam in it. And that would spin the wheels off the starting line. By that time, the engine is spun up to maybe 3,000, and that time the turbocharge kicks in, mm-hmm. and it will go up to 8 and give you a lot of boost. Boost is pressure. Right. So like you could have a 12-to-1 motor with 180 pounds compression, and then you turbocharge it. All you're doing is forcing air into it and make it get up to 14-to-1 compression by just forcing air in it, or air and more fuel, of course. Right. And more fuel to match. More fuel. It has to match 14.2 to 1, 14 to 15-to-1 compression. Okay. Mixture. Yeah. To 1, you got compression, stuff like that. Uh-huh. And it makes it run without it coming apart. If you run it too lean without that fuel mixture, then you'll burn the pistons and ruin the motor. Bad things happen. Yeah, bad things happen. That costs money. Right. Nobody's got that much money. But some people do, I guess. So. Okay. At least they think they do. Right. And some of the other cars, then you'd just put a regular camshaft in, and the RPM stayed up there, and it didn't go up and down so much, yeah. Okay. So now the other type of engine, racing engine you've done a lot of, I know, is circle track kind of racing. Yeah. What is the engine in one of those? What do you have to think about for that? Well, that's the same thing as the class you race in. Okay. And usually that has to do with the weight of the whole car. Okay. Most of the circle tracks are weight. Like a little car with some small motors in it has to weigh 1,500 pounds. or 900. I don't know exactly what those things are, and
Right.
with the driver in them.
Okay.
So that's sometimes you want to get a skinny driver in your car, or maybe a heavy driver. I wouldn't mind having a heavy driver. You can set it on this side of the car, and that keeps this side of the car down when you're going around the corner.
Okay. Right.
And you want in the rear set close to the rear wheel, so you got more traction with a heavy driver.
Okay.
On the rear
So you're
wheels.
kind of being strategic
Oh,
about
yeah,
that
you
weight.
know, look at it, but anyways. So, and then the circle track car, you just have to keep going at certain RPMs, and you might, if you made an engine that goes 7,000, then it even going down, in the corners it might go down to 6,000 and back up to 7.
Okay.
Around and round and round, maybe for 30, 40 laps.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of tough on a motor.
Yeah.
And you have to make the motor so it lasts more than anything else, and not so much horsepower. If you can get a lot of horsepower and then make it last again, you're probably a good chance to win the race.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
so
if you want to win, you're always kind of making a calculation between maximum horsepower versus you don't want to go over too far where it might break
At RPMs.
at a certain RPM.
Yeah, maximum horsepower with the maximum RPMs, yeah.
Right. Okay.
And the weight of the car, that's all.
Okay.
And circle tracking, yeah.
What kind of things do you design into an engine build so that it can last at a high RPM like that for a whole race?
Buy good products, and then some people we've learned over the years, if we have something fail in the engine, you have to stop and go back and really analyze what caused it to fail.
Right.
And you end up finding something.
Okay.
And then I used to have an old friend from Michigan that was in the NASCAR. I think he's passed away now. And he was a tech man from NASCAR. Mm-hmm. And every time that they came to town here, he'd come by and spend a couple of days with me, and we visited a lot. And he told me as much as he could because he was a good friend. And
Yeah.
and I'd tell him what we were doing, and he was interested in what we were doing, and not that we know everything or anything at all.
Sure.
But he was always interested in coming by, and I was really interested in what they did.
Sure. Right.
In NASCAR,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes he could get in a NASCAR engine shop, and sometimes they wouldn't let him in.
Oh, okay.
That's secret stuff, and I think as far as what I know and what I've learned in my life, I would say that I probably somewhere along, maybe a college graduate from what I do, and
Sure.
and then those guys were university instructors. What I gauge them are that builds NASCAR motors,
Yeah.
and they don't tell anybody what they're doing.
No, they're not. They're
Yeah.
not going to make a YouTube video about that.
Yeah, they're not doing anything about that. So you have to sneak in and find somebody that knows a little bit about it. Now, all those things are good.
Yeah.
Anything you can learn is always good, and you can put it into what you're doing with your car. So it's a proven fact.
Mm-hmm.
And normally the information we would get is usually 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and it still helps us with our learning.
Oh,
things
sure.
Like this. And then some people, I say, the mechanics that come in and get their cars worked on, they shouldn't even touch a car. You know, they're first graders. And I said, well, just go golfing and let me work on your car.
Right.
I'll take care of that for
Yeah.
you.
Is there a lot of electronics in the current circle track or dirt track racing and stuff, or they're still using a lot of engines without electronics in those races?
There's some rules in there. You can't use electronics.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had some things that I shouldn't say we had them because other people had them. I not necessarily had them. But in electronics, there was crazy things in circle track.
Okay.
There wasn't so much in drag racing. There was a little bit in drag racing. And I remember in drag racing several years ago, if you raced here in town, again, I say forever, to race, there's so many good racers in Phoenix area that it was, and they were competitive, and of course we raced in the summer, year round here.
Yeah.
And so that we had a lot more advantage than somebody that just raced in the summertime from back east, and it'd be harder to win a Saturday night race here than it would be to go to Denver, Colorado and run the whole national race.
Oh, okay. The competition is so hard here.
So hard here, and
Okay.
so many people race, yeah. And then one time we went back east someplace, and the guy had beat several of our drivers, and come to find out he had electronics in his car. We knew that because there's no way he could win one of our local, one of the Phoenix drivers here, and win that bad, you know.
Oh, I
and
see.
Still, that was, he had like, and he only raced a couple races and quit and never raced again.
Uh-huh.
So he won a couple national races at Kansas City, I think, and someplace, and we never see him again.
Yeah.
So he
didn't want to get found out, sounds like.
Yeah. And then a guy was caught some time ago with, and we thought about that too, as electronics is go with the line lock and tranny brake and stuff like this is all new electronically. Is and I don't want to tell everybody it's all the secrets or anything, but you could actually take a video camera and hook it to your tranny brake in your car, and then aim the camera to the yellow lights on the Christmas tree. As the Christmas tree went down, you could adjust your camera
so that it would trigger
for triggering the ignition, the electric switches in your car.
Oh my gosh.
So as the light went down, you could set an instant, a few seconds, not seconds, but that'd be too late, a few things, and so your crew member would stand up there and aim his camera at the yellow light at the Christmas tree, and when it went down, he'd release your camera electronically.
That doesn't feel very fair.
And somebody got caught with that.
Right.
And so, and we thought about that because it could be done.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't think we'd ever want to do that.
Right.
I'm sure we wouldn't. But anyway, somebody back east got caught doing that.
Okay.
So they was wondering why the cameraman was always around there taking pictures of the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
When his driver was racing the car. So.
Yeah, that's a giveaway.
Yeah. And I remember the one thing is that I think the one guy, his actually wind light came on, and that race, his wind light came on at the end of the drag strip before he got there.
How's that possible?
So there was some kind of possible. Of course it is. With electronics today, you can do anything you want to do.
Wow.
So, I remember one time about cheaters, and we caught him doing that. I think it was in San Francisco, Fremont, California. There was a lot of weeds at the drag strip. A lot of grass growing up there, you know, up by San Francisco. And I think one of the guys there sent his little brother down and hid in the weeds. And when he was coming down the track, before he got there, his brother would put his hand out in front of the lights maybe and turn the lights so he would win before he really got there. So, but I think they maybe caught him too. So
yeah.
I don't know, but things like that's kind of funny.
All kinds of different stories. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, right. So.
All right, Ed. Well, thank you. We're going to follow up some more later. I appreciate that.
Good enough. Thanks.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Yes, sir.